Okay, so picking up where I left off. So basically what has happened is the Israelites are about to enter the land of Canaan. And they are seduced by these Midianite, Moabite women who travel a great distance to seduce them. They're enticed into these sexual orgies, I guess. And basically what they enter into is a worship of a Canaanite god. The event is almost a recapitalization with some heightening of the sacred orgy Israel had started the wandering with back in Exodus 32. So basically, these Israelite men engage in this sexual perversion and worship to these Canaanite gods, as enticed by these Moabite Midianite women, and the result is basically God strikes down 24,000 Israelites with a plague. One very detailed zoom in of the situation is given in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 6. Basically, among the Israelites then, the Midianite Moabite women continued to prostrate themselves in Baal worship. And one day, as all the Israelites were gathered in front of the tabernacle confessing their sin, the son of one of the leaders of the tribe of Simeon paraded before them a Moabite woman and basically took her to his tent right in front of the Israelite leaders, and both of them were killed as a result of this. Okay, so you have this thing where basically the Moabite Midianite women conspire and seduce these Israelite men, and the basic result is we have the deaths of 24,000 Israelites. 24,000 Israelites. So the next thing I want to get to is, where did the Midianite women come from? The Moabite women would have traveled north, but the Midianite women, and presumably the leadership, since this woman is called the daughter of a priest or chieftain, would have had to have moved into the area. For nomads, this is not much problem. Indeed, they could have even have facilitated the travel of the Moabite women from the south. In Numbers 31:10 and 11, they are said to have been in camps and in towns which they were occupying at this time. This would have situated them in either Shihon's old territory toward Moab, or Shihon's old territory toward the east, now vacated by Israel. If the latter, they were ostensibly attempting to engage Israel somehow. The scale and scope of the sexual atrocity was extensive, indicating the number of Israelite men and Midianite women would have been quite high. The plague on Israel was stopped after 24,000 Israelites were killed, presumably most men. They were called the sons of Israel, 25:9. A large group, or most of Israelite leadership, was ordered by God to be executed until the action of Phoenix restored some stability of the situation. Numbers 25:4. A chief leader of both the Israelites and the Midianites are involved in broad daylight in this situation, in this sexually inspired fiasco. The Hebrew text consistently draws attention to the large number of Israelites involved by using words like the people and the sons of Israel. This would have required several thousand, maybe even 10,000 foreign women to have precipitated or affected such a large-scale apostasy in such a short period of time, and these women would have had to have traveled deliberately just to do this. And it is here at this point that the treachery of the Midianites becomes visible in the narrative. This was a deliberate strategy on the part of the Midianite leadership to use sex as a weapon and have Israel abandon the protection and life source of their God. This first gives the substance of the treachery and deceit. Numbers 25:16. The Lord said, "Treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them, because they treated you as enemies when they deceived you at the affair of Peor, and their sister Cosbi, the daughter of the Midianite leader, the woman who was killed when the plague came as a result of Peor." Have you, Numbers 31:15. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and were the means of turning the Israelites away from the Lord in what happened at Peor, so the plague struck the Lord's people. So Balaam somehow is back in the picture. Somehow Balaam advised the women on how to turn the Israelites away from their God. Okay. According to the hard sayings of the Bible, basically it appears that the Israelite men began to have sexual relations with the Moabite Midianite women. Numbers 25. How such liaisons began, we can only guess, but this seems to be connected to the bad advice given to the Moabites by the prophet Balaam. Apparently still bent on helping the Moabite king, the Balaam had stayed in the land of Moab and Midian. Numbers 31:16 informs us that the Midianite women were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and were the means of turning the Israelites away from God and basically towards the Canaanite god of Baal. I should also point out that the Israelite male, the temptation seduction was purely sexual at first. That there was literally no religious motivation to seek Baal out. According to Bible background commentary, it is clear after sexual relations had led to participation in the pagan sacrificial feast, the next step was formal association with a particular god. The god was Baal Peor. Baal was the name of the great Canaanite god of vegetation. Through the ritual may have been fertility oriented, the Israelites were not engaging in agriculture, so it is difficult to imagine what connection that might have been. In other words, Israel had no religious interest in the agriculture or vegetation god. The attraction was purely physical, sex, and then expensive meat and wine. Only Balaam would have had the theological sophistication to know that this would separate Israel from Yahweh and make Israel vulnerable to normal military forces. And of course, the result was a plague that killed 24,000 Israelites. Now, let's think about the implications of this for a second in terms of how this would have occurred. Number one, Balaam cannot help Moab in military curses, but on his way home he realizes that God, who protects Israel, can inflict much more damage than Moab. He stops and counsels the Midianite princes on how to get Israel to abandon their great protector. The Midianite princes agreed to let Balaam appeal to the Midianite people, especially the women. They're the ones who followed Balaam's advice to enlist their aid in using sex as a weapon against Israel. And one of the following absolute incredible events had to have happened. Number one, either the women agreed with Balaam's plan and then talked to their husbands into letting them commit wholesale, premeditated, and government-facilitated adultery, or the men agreed with Balaam's plan and then talked their wives into abandoning wholesale, premeditated, wholesale, premeditated, and government-facilitated adultery, or the men agreed with Balaam's plan and forced their wives into committing wholesale, premeditated, government-facilitated adultery. Or the chief's elite Midian forced both men and women to agree on committing wholesale, premeditated, government-facilitated adultery for the sake of Balak's paranoia and Midianite anti-Israelite or Israel sentiment. Additionally, fathers and mothers may have talked their unmarried daughters into or forced them into committing wholesale, premeditated, government-facilitated adultery. The Midianite power forced the Moabite women to lead the charge, but they disappear in the narrative after the first mention. Everything else is Midianite only. And the government plans, funds, and orchestrates the mass caravans of Moabite women and Midianite migration to the area where Israel is camping. Now, I can perhaps see this occurring on an individual small scale. I'm sure it happens today in modern cultures to get ahead, but to think a culture or a nation would deliberately do this marriage destructive, family destructive, and dehumanizing atrocity on the scale of 5 to 15,000 wives and families is staggering, and as destructive as regular ritual prostitution would have been to healthy family life in the Canaanite areas in Palestine. This action by the Midianites makes that look wonderfully innocent and harmless by comparison.